Good day to you. It's a subject that arouses curiosity, many fantasies, and sometimes fierce judgment among many of us. The caste system in India. But is this judgment deserved? Where does this system come from? Is it destined to disappear? So we are going to delve together into the historical origins of this system in order to answer these questions. First of all, the caste system is unique to Hinduism, a polytheistic religion, that is, believing in multiple gods or incarnations of the divine. Among the oldest still practiced today, and which are mainly found in South Asia, particularly in India and Nepal. In fact, while tearing my hair out over this subject, reading things as fascinating and surprising as they are contradictory, and discussing with Indians about this subject. To understand the caste system, we must first grasp the basics of Hinduism. I'll keep it concise. To put it simply, Hinduism is more a set of philosophical concepts combined with very variable elements of faith, drawing a significant part of its origins from ancient foundational texts, the Vedas. Moreover, Hinduism lacks a central institution, unified clergy, or rigid dogma. This is a fundamental difference from our religions, requiring a lot of hindsight on the way we understand and anticipate things. This nature of Hinduism is what allows the tolerance, openness, and flexibility that we regularly observe among Hindus. In fact, completely divergent and even opposing Hindu currents have peacefully coexisted in India for centuries. All of this is not easy to understand for us, whose cultures have developed around faith functioning in a completely different way. Now that this is clarified, let's return to the mystery of the caste system in India. It's important to note that there is no absolute consensus regarding the history of the caste system in India. Historians, as well as theologians, have varying and contradictory opinions on this matter. I present to you a biased historical approach, not theological, that I share with you, based on the readings I have been able to do from the periods when the various texts on which the caste system is based were written, from the exchanges I was able to have and my understanding of this subject that follows. So you have probably heard of the castes and the famous untouchables with such a hard life. But I bet a majority of you would have a hard time naming the different castes and their role in society. That's perfectly normal since we're not really exposed to it. Here are some elements to help clarify and better understand this. In numerous ancient and sacred Hindu texts, some dating back to around 1500 before Common Era. Consider this historical parallel. It's around the time when the 18th Egyptian dynasty, which includes the Ramses and others based in Thebes, rises to power in Egypt. The key concept of Varnas first appears in Hindu texts as early as 1500 before Common Era. This concept roughly describes an ideal of 4 roles to be filled in society, without mentioning birth at any time, but describing the qualities required for an individual to fulfill this role. The Varna is therefore a role that corresponds to the nature of an individual, that is to say, to his qualities. The 4 Varnas include Brahmins, who serve as priests and teachers, and any other thinking head, whose one of the essential missions is the protection and maintenance of the knowledge and understandings of Hinduism through generations. The Varna is the closest thing to a clergy, without really being one due to the multiple and flexible nature of Hinduism. Then come the Kshatriyas, who are the warriors and rulers of the temporal world, almost equivalent to our nobles in Europe. The Vaishyas, who are the artisans, traders, and farmers. And, finally, the Shudras, who are the workers, whose role is to serve and assist the other castes. According to his writings, it is based on one's nature, in other words, one's character, strengths, and weaknesses that one practices, one or the other of the Varna. That is to say, a role in society. Note that there is no concept encompassing everything outside these Varna, and I insist on this point. And even less any notion of untouchable, since we are talking here about roles supposed to correspond to society as a whole. The mystery, therefore, remains complete. How did the Indian caste system end up becoming such a rigid and sometimes hard system of organizing society? Well, it's a system that was built slowly, very slowly, even over the centuries. The Hindu religion not being unified as you understood the caste system was thus built. starting from the notion of Varna mentioned earlier in certain texts, such as the Dharmas Astras. Forgive the pronunciation in this organically, depending on the times, cultures, and demands of the moment. Thus, according to certain hypotheses, it would be from the period of the emperors of the Gupta dynasty, extending from the 4th to the 7th century. In our era, particularly structuring for Indian societies in the plural, a new concept begins to appear in certain texts, the concept of Jati, that is to say, birth. This concept will remarkably complicate Indian societies, gradually making roles and professions hereditary, transforming the symbolic and open concept of Varna into a human tradition, in fact losing its original meaning over time. When I said very slowly, it's a process of several centuries and far from uniform. Societies will be rigid in some areas while staying flexible in others. This is probably why historians and other authors can't agree on the subject. The system is forming in one area, while populations elsewhere are doing the opposite. Over time, particularly among populations facing Islamic invasions and occupations from the 12th to 18th century, people of a specific birth mainly marry within their group, creating hereditary roles, some of which span 2 Varnas simultaneously. It is possible that this is a consequence of the absence of real centralized Hindu political management, the leaders being either Muslim or enslaved to a Muslim sovereign, and therefore being more concerned with the enslavement of these populations and or maintaining their position. So it is really from the notion of Jati that the rigidity of the caste system that we still observe today in India stems among Hindus, and which even remains present among a very significant portion of converts to other religions. The paradox that you have probably also identified is that this notion of Jati is somehow contradictory with the notion of Varna, because it no longer assigns roles within society according to nature, in the sense of the quality of the individual, but according to his birth. Despite everything, it has created a lasting social hierarchy that persists today. The Constitution of India prohibits caste-based discrimination. This hierarchy theoretically works as follows. The Brahmins are at the top of this hierarchy and possess significant spiritual and moral authority. The Kshatriyas hold military and political power, while the Vaishyas generate material prosperity and resources. Finally, the Shudras serve the other castes, enabling them to fulfill their roles. Because of the Jatis, the 4 Varnas have led to the emergence of subcastes related to birth, which correspond to one or more of these Varnas. The notion of Jati has led to the emergence of an implicit category, the casteless. Among these casteless are all people without Jati, which includes you and me unless you have Hindu origins. But also, and at another level, people considered to be polluted by the tasks they perform and which would be impure. You have likely identified the famous untouchables from this depiction. This also includes those who have committed extremely severe offenses, warranting exclusion from society. In other words, people who have been stripped of their Jati. Untouchables are also considered to form a 5th Varna outside of the traditional Varnas. This 5th Varna is initially called Panchama, simply meaning 5th, in Sanskrit, and, more recently, Harijan by Mahatma Gandhi, the term Harijan meaning son of God, or commonly in modern India under the name of Dalit, coming from the Sanskrit term meaning oppressed. 2 factors seem to be at the source of this system. The first one is organizational. Hindu leaders and societies have regularly sought to structure themselves and their states without the consequence being a rigid system. The subcontinent was occupied first by Islam for over 6 centuries, then by Christians. The British have strongly influenced the practices of Hinduism. Although they brilliantly resisted these external influences, they deeply marked Indian societies and Hinduism. This factor, combined with the effect of time and traditions, seems to be the factor that slowly crystallized this system in the subcontinent. For the little aside, the status of women and the relationship to sexuality in modern Indian society is far more related to the customs inherited from Islam and the Victorians of the British era than to Hindu traditions. So it is under the effect of human history and Hindu life philosophies combined with the notions of Jati and Varna, that the caste system that we still observe today was created. Although still very present today, the new realities of Indian society since independence, particularly due to growing economic prosperity. Political efforts to end the caste system will, in time, overcome its rigidity, but not eliminate the associated notions entirely. I hope I have clarified all this for you. If that's the case, I invite you to give the video a thumbs up. This is a particularly complex subject, towards which there is no real consensus, as you have understood, particularly because of the nature of Hinduism. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. I will be happy to answer them, to the best of my understanding of the subject, of course. For the next episode, we will stay as promised. And following your votes on social networks in India, addressing the Maratha epic, the Marathas are a Hindu people who put an end to the domination of Islamic states in India. They accomplished it in a remarkable manner, which I will describe to you. They subsequently dominated the subcontinent for over a century and were formidable enemies for the British, who only managed to overcome the Marathas with difficulty and after 3 wars. To not miss this episode, I invite you to subscribe and click on the little bell. See you soon.